Hello, my friends. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. This is a place where I talk about books, and I've got 7 to tell you about that I finished in the past week. And before I get to those, a little bit about what's been keeping me busy. We had friends visit from Edmonton over the weekend, so we did lots of cool touristy kinds of things. On the spring equinox, we went to Butchart Gardens, so I am going to include a short video, well, it's maybe 5 minutes long, at the end of this one. So stick around after I finish talking for your own little tour of Butchart Gardens. We also went to the Malahat Skywalk. So this is on the Malahat First Nation. The people there put together this skywalk. It's about 30 minutes drive north of Victoria. And you go up this wooden ramp until you're walking in the crown of trees. You keep going up and up until it's a tower, and you go round and round. And at the top, there is a magnificent view out over Vancouver Island and the surrounding little islands and inlet. There are eagles up there and lots of information plaques. There's a wooden sculpture done by, I think her name is Tanya Bubb, of animals and birds coming up to it. At the very top, there's this net where you can walk out on it and see below. When I looked at it from underneath, it looked like it might be a little bit scary. But once I got up there, I could see how solid it was. It wasn't see-through in the way that I've experienced before at a kind of a plexiglass thing in the mountains in France. That was a lot scarier. This was just kind of fun, bouncy, and then you have a choice how to get down once you get to the top. You can walk down the same way you walked up, or there's a spiral staircase in the middle, or you can take a spiral slide. Of course, I had to do that. It was so much fun. It's only 8 seconds. Whew, down you are at the bottom. It was a great day. And then the final day, on the Sunday that our friends were here, we went to drag brunch at the Vicious Poodle. And the 2 drag performers, the drag king Eddie Licious and the drag queen Honey Doomy, they were both fantastic, so entertaining. Routines were, Eddie Licious as an acrobat did cartwheels and handstands and high energy performance in amongst us as we were eating, and had costumes like tearaway outfits and Superman underneath. In one, he started with like he was a telephone, and Honey Doomy had a mechanical kind of costume at one point as well, Texas Instruments calculator, push my button kind of thing. Another time she came out in a towel and a shower cap. And then under that, there was maybe a Little Mermaid type outfit with these 2 sharks hanging. I laughed so hard. We had a great time. So, on to the books. I'm going to start with a picture book by Kate Beaton called Shark Girl. Speaking of sharks, first I want to tell you about Kate Beaton. She comes from Nova Scotia in Canada, and she's the author of Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands, which was the winner of Canada Reads last year, I think, or the year before. It's an excellent, graphic memoir. And People April is coming up, so if you're looking for a suggestion of a memoir or biography, I do recommend Kate Beaton's Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands. So this is a children's picture book. It is good for all ages. It's a riff on The Little Mermaid. So we have Shark Girl, just living her life. When she gets caught up in a bottom trawler fishing, and there's all this bycatch that people don't eat, so they're gonna just die. What does Shark Girl do? She wants revenge. She talks to the Sea Witch, helps her out, getting some legs, and next thing you know, she gets a job on that boat. And there's some really cool things, like a cutaway of the fishing trawler. See all the different rooms. Studies up on what it's like to be a human when the big bad captain tries to capture her. Her shark nature comes out, and she takes a chomp. It was the nastiest thing she'd ever bitten. It was the flavor of an old hairy arm with a wrinkled tattoo. No wonder sharks don't like to eat people. Gross, she said. And back she went into the ocean. And mutiny happens. Even the end papers have got great comics on them. So, coincidentally, I saw on Elizabeth of Bouquins and Books channel, she talked about a book called Shark Arm. And this is a true story about a shark that coughed up a human arm in Australia. And there was a distinctive tattoo on it. And so this was related to a murder that had happened. And the book is about figuring out who had actually committed that murder, or how did the arm end up in the shark's stomach. So I guess Kate Beaton must have known about that story too. I'm going to link Elizabeth's video down below, and that People April that I mentioned, it is hosted by Elizabeth of Bouquins and Books and co-hosted by Roz of Scallydandling about the books. So more information is in the description box. The other thing that is happening in April is a picture book readathon. So this is one of my many suggestions that you could pick up for Picture This. The two hosts for Picture This are Shelley Swearingen and Jack of Spread Book Joy. So more information in the description box. And I am going to be talking about picture books for the next month and more, mixed in with the other books that I talk about, which is kind of usual, actually. Coming up on Monday is the International Trans Day of Visibility. And last year, to celebrate, I did a vlog where I only read books or listened to audiobooks created by trans and gender non-conforming authors. This year, I'm not able to do that. My sister is arriving for a visit. So instead, I have been trying to feature books by trans authors. This topic is dear to me because hatred towards us in the queer community is on the rise, and trans people and drag performers are primary targets. There's an election coming up here in Canada at the end of April. We'll be voting for our federal representatives and Prime Minister. At the drag brunch on Sunday, there was information about dragthevote.ca. I will include a link for that below. And also more information from EGAL, which is Canada's leading organization for 2S LGBTQIA plus people and issues. So far this year, I have read 8 books by trans and non-binary authors, including this next one that I'm going to tell you about. And also Jess Battis, Valérie Ba, and her translator, Kama Le Mackerel, Makana Yamamoto, Lucy Sant, Marie-Helen Bertino, Bessie Flores Zaldivar, and the illustrator Mar Julia. And this next author, Torrey Peters, is an American trans woman. Her debut novel is Detransition Baby. It's phenomenal. So much energy, so much drama. There's plenty of drama in Stag Dance as well. So this is 4 stories, and each one is a different genre. There's horror, speculative fiction, a teen romance, and kind of a combination Western and tall tale. That's the title story. All of them, Torrey Peters says, she's puzzling out the inconvenient aspects of an ongoing trans life. So many different aspects of interpersonal relationships and trans women having kindnesses between them and cruelties between them, trans and non-trans people. This blew me away. This is so good. Oh, wow. The vocabulary in Stag Dance. I have to read you a little bit from there so you get a flavor for it. And this passage, which is set in a logging camp in the olden days, like maybe the late 19th century, possibly a little bit more recent than that, also reminded me of the National Film Board's The Log Driver's Waltz. So if you know that clip that's been shown on Canadian TV so many times, or if I can find a link to it, I will include that down below if you're not familiar with it. Anyway, so this is in the voice of a lumberjack. I returned to the musicians caterwauling with the tempo zooming. Lit by the throw of firelight, danced that bubble-cuffing son of a bitch, Johnny Jobs. He may have been an irritant, but the man was catty on the cocks. Like the best river pigs, he'd grown up burling, and now he had his stag pants hiked way up to reveal soles that had become a blur of tapping, just as they might have been on the spin of the burling logs. The musicians played faster and faster, but Johnny Jobs tapped easily to keep up, and we were all cheering, including myself. I'd never seen boots move so fast, and I laughed in incredulous joy at the skill of it. And this is so skillfully done, so entertaining and thought-provoking. Highly recommend this. 5 stars. Next up, I have a memoir in audio by the Australian writer Inga Simpson. And I picked it up because Simpson's recent novel, Thinning, is on the long list for the Stella Prize. And that book wasn't available to me, but I found this memoir in Hoopla. and it's read by the author, where she's writing about the 7 or 8 years that she spent living in the forest outside of Brisbane, Australia. So each chapter starts with the name of a tree, and I learned about trees. You know, I love learning about trees. So, for example, it could be boxbrush or different kinds of eucalypts. There was the gray gum, the rose gum, the spotted gum, tallow wood, bloodwood, and she ties descriptions of those trees into things that are going on in her life, things that she's thinking about, her wife and the 2 kids, and what it's like living there in this little cottage, which has unreliable electricity and water. And at one point she said, it's kind of like camping, except with a more comfortable bed. So during the time that she was living there, she said she embarked on her second PhD, and this time it was in English literature, looking at the history of Australian nature writing and its value today as an environmental strategy, a way of reconnecting readers with nature. And you can hear the gulls. There's a lot of nature in my video today. But I've got more nature writing to tell you about a little bit later in this video. As I was listening to this, I was thinking about what it was like on that Malahat Skywalk that I was telling you about, just being in amongst the trees. And last week I talked about the Korean author Han Kang's book, We Do Not Part. What I didn't mention is that trees come up in that book. The narrator, Kyung Ha, she talks about different trees as she encounters them in the story. There's a hackberry and a cryptomeria, which I had never heard of before, so I looked it up. And then when I went to Butchart Gardens, there was a tree. I thought, wait a minute, that must be a cryptomeria, which was fresh in my mind because I had just looked it up online. So cool things. I love learning new things. And Inga Simpson has a very poetic way about writing about the privilege of living so close to nature and the lessons that she learned from the forest. It's an excellent memoir. So another good choice for People April. My current audiobook is also Australian. I'm finally getting to Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood. And I've got another Australian read. I haven't started Praiseworthy yet by Alexis Wright. And it's a fat one, 660 pages. And so I am looking for buddy readers. I don't want to start reading this until May 1st. So after these readathons happening in April, probably going to take 8 weeks to read it. So if you are interested, put your name in the comments field and I will keep track of that. I'll be talking about this some more as May 1st draws closer. But I don't know, Aussie April used to be a thing. I don't know if anybody's still doing it. If so, please let me know. But this is not going to be until May that we start reading that. Got another audiobook to tell you about, and it's by a Canadian nature writer, Trevor Herriot. It's called The Economy of Sparrows. This is a novel. Trevor is also a naturalist and activist, and he lives in Regina, Saskatchewan. A previous book that I read of his is called Towards a Prairie Atonement. which is about grasslands conservation and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And both of those issues come up in this novel. There's also mention of a specific program, a treaty land sharing network, which sounds really interesting. I will include a link to that in the description box. So this novel features a woman named Nell Rowan. She's retired and she's an avid birder, and she volunteers data for eBird online, worldwide data tracking. She's living on farmland, and although she has chickens and some horses, she's not actually farming, but she does have a little bit of conflict with the people who are farming around her, but also comes to friendships and understandings with these people. There's a book that was in her family since she was a child. I think it was her mother's book called Taverner's Birds of Canada. And this has been reissued since. It's a volume that I'm actually familiar with. And she does talk about some real people, some early naturalists. Also, that birds are often named for naturalists. And sometimes these naturalists are not what we would call nice people now, and there is a movement afoot, I was already aware of this, to rename some of these species. Examples of the 19th century naturalists, these men who were racist and acted in offensive ways, are John Kirk Townsend, who desecrated Indigenous graves in order to send skulls for studies that purported Indigenous peoples were actually inferior to white people. And there's the Townsend Solitaire and the Townsend's Warbler. Here's a passage from the novel. She thought of Taverner again as she counted a small flock of buffleheads. In a letter he wrote to Fleming in 1904, he was boasting that he had shot and skinned more than 500 birds that year. At first, numbers like that made her skin crawl, but nowadays she reserved her outrage for the untold number of birds poisoned every summer by farm chemicals or eaten by predators taking advantage of dysfunctional ecosystems, for the many too sick or short of insects to rear young in her corner of the municipality. And she's in southeast Saskatchewan. She also talks about shifting baselines syndrome, which comes up in the book Wilding by Isabella Bird, which is that it's human nature to think that the baseline is the way things were when you were a kid. And the kind of data that she and many other people are contributing is helping to have a longer look at what is happening to species over time. With these very realistic, believable characters and the environmental issues at the core, this book really held my interest. And so did this next one. I've already returned it to the library because of a waiting list. It's called Briefly, A Delicious Life, and it's by Nell Stevens, who's a British author. She's also a professor of creative writing. When I talked about George Sand, a graphic biography by Séverine Vidal a while back, I'll include a link to that video in case you missed it. In the comments on that video, Roz, scallydandling about the books, and another subscriber, Ulba, both recommended this book, Briefly, A Delicious Life, because it is a novel about George Sand, and specifically about one winter, a few months in 1838, when George Sand went to Mallorca for the health of her son and her good friend and sometimes lover, Frederic Chopin, and her daughter was with them as well. So there were the four of them. But things did not go well. They went there for the sunshine. It was cold and rainy. Chopin nearly died. The townspeople did not want them there. They were way too unconventional. George Sand, who wore men's clothing most of the time. None of them went to church. And this village, Valdemosa, is a place where on a Sunday it's scandalous for a woman to even lift her mantilla. So, the story itself, the novel, it is from the viewpoint of a ghost, a girl who was 14 when she died over 300 years earlier, and she's been haunting this former monastery where George Sand and her entourage are staying. It's really well done. And because this ghost can slip into people's minds, she has access to their memories, and that gives us more of George Sand's life, which is a really interesting way to learn more about an author from that time. And the writing is just beautiful. Here's an example. Once I'd found my way inside a person's head, their pasts were right there, under the slop and tide of feelings on the surface, and I could see it all for myself, as though I was translating a language I didn't know I knew. And the way that George Sand is always so full of wonder and astonishment at the world around her makes her just such an intriguing character. And one of these days I'm going to read something that she actually wrote. I will get to it. Another person who seems astonished at the world around her is Maira Kalman. And this is her latest book, Still Life with Remorse, Family Stories. Maira Kalman was born in Israel, grew up in the US. She is a painter, and this book is full of gorgeous paintings and about, 39 or 40 really short, little brief stories. So some are about her own family and extended family. Some are about writers or musicians like Liszt, Schumann, Mendelssohn, Brahms, Mahler, and Chopin. She talks about how he was friends with the painter Delacroix, and in the biography of George Sand, the one by Séverine Vidal, that friendship between the two and the times that they stayed at George Sand's house in France are they're there. So that was cool to encounter them again in this book. There's some other famous people, the writers Kafka and Tolstoy and Chekhov. I guess he wasn't fully appreciated when he was alive, but she says, long after his death, we love Chekhov. Some consolation, but not for him. She talks about books a lot as well. In this little piece called Sundoku, where she's talking about her cousin, she has piles of books, many unread. There is a word for that in Japanese, tsundoku. And it is not a criticism. It is meant as a delight. Beautiful stacks of books that may never be read, but simply sit happily in your room, smiling at you. Remorse comes up a lot in here, including in this example. The Romanovs could have lived longer if they'd just been a teeny bit nicer to their people. But they had not an iota of remorse about anything. Lenin and Stalin, same. Not an iota of remorse. This is lack of remorse on an epic scale. And still we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and midnight snack. And still we sing. I love this sense of how life goes on despite hardships, despite how many people in her family died in the Holocaust. I'm going to end with one last piece. It's called War Still. Wars surround us and always will. To understand why, you would have to go back to the beginning of time, and still you would be baffled. You would cry out in anguish, but to no avail. You could shake your fist at the heavens or fall to your knees in weeping prayer, but still to no avail. Such is the world. Yes, wars going on right now. Palestine, Ukraine, Yemen. We've got an economic war against us from the United States. Thankfully, it's a bloodless one. It's something that will very likely affect us as readers. Bookstores across Canada have joined the independent bookstores. They've joined with Indigo. This is unprecedented, I think, in asking the federal government here to reconsider counter tariffs on books, because so many Canadian authors have their books printed or warehoused or both in the United States, and those books will be subject to tariffs when they come back into Canada. And the book business runs on such fine margins that we could easily lose a lot of publishers and businesses if this goes on. Those counter tariffs at this point are scheduled to start on April 2nd. So fingers crossed that that gets changed. And this is the last book that I've got to tell you about. My favorite of the bunch. It's another great bunch, but this one, loved it so much. Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. This is currently shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. Oh, so good. If you don't know, the author is a political analyst and policy advisor who was traveling all over the world when COVID hit. Then she was forced to stay home. And in addition to her home in London, she had a stone kind of cottage place out in the country in England. And one day she found a very young hare, a leveret, who might have been 1 or 2 days old. And she ended up rescuing it and did everything in her power to keep it wild. She never named it, for example, and kept the noise level very low, was very quiet around. Guests had to whisper. Hares have very sensitive sense of smell, so no strong perfumes. She did everything she could to allow this hare to grow up. And so she had the extraordinary opportunity to see a wild animal up close and wrote about it so beautifully. She talked about how soothing and calm it was just to be in the presence of the Hare. It eased her anxiety and nervous tension that she thinks she had as a result of the kind of life that she was living, always being on the move, always being on call for other people. She says, the Hare didn't change, I did. I have not tamed the Hare, but in many ways she has stilled me. And all of the descriptions of how that comes about, the day-to-day habits. She says, hares are creatures of habit, and I had become one too. Through the leveret, I had rediscovered the pleasure of attachment to a place and the contentment that can be derived from exploring it fully, rather than constantly seeking ways to leave it, and believing that satisfaction can only lie in novel experiences. And that was something that I took to heart as well, because I'm somebody who also likes to seek out novel experiences, like sliding down a slide at the Malahat Skywalk. But since moving to Victoria, I have also rediscovered, I think, the pleasures of staying in one place. There are issues in here that I've come across addressed in other books, like how the removal of hedgerows affects wildlife, and so do intensive farming practices. Inga Simpson, in her book Understory, also talks about that privilege of living close to nature and being a witness. And I just love the way that Chloe Dalton puts it. Whereas before I sought out exceptional experiences and set myself against the crowd, I take comfort in the fact that this process of self-discovery has been felt by millions before me, and that there is nothing original in finding consolation in nature. It is there for all of us. Perhaps our one true shared heritage and source of hope for regeneration in our own hard-pressed lives. And even the way that the chapters often end in foreshadowing. When it came, danger was to arrive from an altogether different quarter. And in a different chapter, it was soon to prove its value in a way I could never have foreseen. So this is absolutely glorious, and it is the group read for People April. So I highly encourage you to participate in that group read. I am going to dip in, I think, to the conversation on Discord, even though I'm always unsure what's happening on Discord, but I want to hear what other people have to say about raising hares. It is great. It's such a good book. That is all I've got for you today. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate hearing from you. So please do say hello in the comments and stick around for a view of Butchart Gardens in the spring. And I will see you next week talking about more books. In the meantime, happy reading, everybody. Bye for now.